Welcome to Check 1 2, where we talk to survivors, advocates and supporters of testicular cancer awareness here at the world famous podcast studio Glasgow. Today I'm sitting down with former footballer and TalkSport pundit Jason Cundy to talk about his personal journey as a testicular cancer survivor. Jason opens up on the challenges he faced in the footballing world during his diagnosis. Today we'll explore the stigma and embarrassment surrounding men's health in football, discussing why testicular cancer remains a taboo subject, despite affecting players like Alan Stubbs, John Hartson and the late Dylan Tombides. Jason reflects on how far we've come in breaking the silence on male health issues and what more can be done to raise awareness. Tune in for an honest, inspiring conversation about resilience, health and football. Ladies and gentlemen, Jason Cundy. Thanks so much for coming on Check 1 2. It genuinely does mean a lot to us, especially being like just a small charity podcast as well. You've had quite a journey both as a footballer but as a cancer survivor. So it would just be great for those listening who don't know your story, if you could just take us through your story and how you found your cancer and what your initial reactions were with that.
Well, I was playing for Ipswich at the time, and I had an infected leg. I had a shin injury with stitches in it, and it became infected, and my groins were swollen. And I was just sitting there watching EastEnders of all things at home, and as men do, you find your hands down your trousers without even knowing you're doing it. And as I'm doing it, I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, this don't feel right. And one of my balls, my left one, was larger, so much larger and heavier than the other one. And I just put it down to the fact that I had stitches, I had an infected leg, I was on antibiotics. And I went to show the physio the next morning, and he kind of laughed at it because it did look rather odd. One was dangling down quite significantly than the other. And it's like, anyway, he said, look, we'll talk to the doctor about it. And this was on a Thursday. So by the time the Saturday came round, we were playing at home, and the club doctor came in. The team had been selected. George Burley was my manager, and it was about an hour and a half before kick-off, and he had a look at it. So he came in and had a look, and his reaction scared me because I could tell straight away that this has got nothing to do with my shin, the stitches. And he said, "You can't play." And I'm like, what do you mean I can't play? Isn't it an hour and 15, 20 minutes till kickoff? Team's picked, I'm playing. And he said, well, we need to get you checked into the hospital after the game. And that straight away was like red flags all over the place. What is, no reaction to something I felt was quite insignificant. That's not the reaction I was expecting. Anyway, during the game, I just remember where the ball had gone dead, maybe an injury or something. And I just remember staring at the grass thinking, what is this? What is going on here? And for a fleeting moment, cancer went through my mind. When I say fleeting, it was literally that. Anyway, the game continued. They couldn't fit me in on after the game because it was too late. But on the Monday morning, I drove back. I was living in London. I drove up to Ipswich, and it was a private hospital. And waiting for me at 9 o'clock was a nurse outside. Then you think, why someone that this, this doesn't feel right. And I went in and filled out some forms, had an ultrasound, an ultrasound scan on it. And within less than 10 seconds of him scanning the ball, he said, this is going to have to come out. And all of a sudden you realise that those fears are slowly but surely being realised. And I remember my palms getting really sweaty. And he said, well, of course, then he didn't give me too much info. And I said to him, is it a tumour? And he said, yes. I said, could it be cancerous? He said, yes. Straight away, you're dealing with my world had changed from that moment on. They couldn't do the operation then. I went home, had to tell my mum and dad. My mum was in floods of tears. I'd only been married 10 months, maybe less. And my wife was in tears and I was all right. I mean, I didn't feel scared. I didn't feel like I was going to die at all. But people around me, I suppose it's when you know how you feel. I mean, I played on the Saturday. I felt fit. I felt healthy. We'll have to go and deal with it. So I drove back up on the Tuesday morning to have the ball removed. That went well. I mean, I've never been in so much pain. That was when I come out of the surgery and I first come around. Bloody hell! I was on morphine and they just had to knock me out again because the pain was incredible. And when I eventually came around, it was going to be 10 days from the ball being removed for them finding out if it was cancerous. I'd already kind of made my mind up that it was going to be cancerous. We didn't have, this was back in 1997. So the internet, I didn't have Google. You try and research as best you can. And all the signs pointed in the direction of my age, the symptoms, I didn't feel ill, but, there's many different ways of testicular cancer presenting itself. And, my ball, by the time I come around to the operation, it had doubled in size again. So we're talking a serious ball here.
Yeah.
I'd made my mind up and I'd come to terms with the fact that it was going to be cancerous.
And it is that thing though with the people around you, because I was the same when I had my diagnosis. You're going, right, okay, I've just got to kind of get through this, but the people around you, they hear the word cancer and it is a massive worry. And the thing that comes up time and time again in the conversations that we have in the podcast with guys is every guy says the same. I was young, I was fit, and I think that's the big issue is that it is happening to young, fit men, professional footballer, you can't get any kind of height of fitness in terms of that. And see, after you had had your surgery and all that, did you go through chemo or radiotherapy to help with that?
So after the 10 days, we went back up to Ipswich and then we sat in front of the doctor and then he said to me, the ball is cancerous. I then went for x-rays, I went for blood tests to find out if it had spread. Thankfully, I was in the luxury position really where I could go and see a physio the next day. The club doctor turned up and saw me. And I was in a world where walking around naked in front of other men was a daily occurrence. Right? You don't feel embarrassed of your body. It's something footballers or professional sportsmen and women do. It's just something we do. So I was in that position where had I been a young guy that was, I don't know, an accountant, I wouldn't have had that on tap. So I was very fortunate that I had people around me and then I had the best care. So that's, I think, a point worth mentioning that, if you feel something, go and get it checked out because that's what the doctors are there for. That's their job. And so I had realised it hadn't spread, which was obviously a big bonus. I then went back actually and spoke to George Burley and David Sheepshanks, who was the then chairman of Ipswich. And we then said, look, here's the situation. I have to come in for chemo. Looks like my season could be over. This was now in the March. We were fighting for the playoffs at the time. And I then had to store some sperm because chemotherapy can make you sterile. I already had one boy, Joshua, who would have been 4, 5 at the time. So I still wanted to have children with my now then first wife. So I stored some sperm. I then had one dose of chemotherapy. It was a trial at that particular time, and it was just one large dose of chemotherapy, which lasted about an hour. I seem to remember something like that, maybe longer. And I stayed in hospital for 2 or 3 days. And then came home and, was just in remission from there. And I'd go back periodically to checkups. And it was kind of dealt with like that. I never played again. I did try to come back playing that season, but the chemotherapy, as I'm sure have you had chemotherapy yet? It completely whacks you. I mean, obviously it's a very powerful drug. And it completely wiped me sideways. It took me some time actually to get back to what I considered full fitness. And yeah, that was that. It was all dealt with pretty quickly from me discovering it to when I had the chemotherapy to the operation. And it was all done pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think, and at that time, you would have been one of the first recipients of the chemo that Dr. Einhorn had kind of came up with for testicular cancer patients as well, which is, incredible that, and that you got that, but also they would have still been playing with the potency of it as well. So no wonder it kind of wiped you out as much as it did. Yeah, and I think people forget as well. When the testicle's removed, that's a massive surgery. And especially being a football player and where they were cutting through. How was your physical recovery in terms of just your muscles and things like that for you?
That side of things wasn't so bad. Obviously, I didn't play for quite some time. I did try before the end of the season. We got to the playoffs, and I did try. Looking back, it was just ridiculous to try and even think I could get back to professional football within months. It just, but I tried and I couldn't last the session. I was absolutely wiped out. And I realised then that I have to sit this out. We didn't get promoted that year, unfortunately, but it was painful watching. But, I had to get myself fit for the following season. That was my main aim. And I still wasn't 100% fit. Even about 5 or 6 games in, we played Bradford away. And after about 60 minutes, this was about 3 games in, I couldn't run. I just could not move. My legs had gone. And it was a bit concerning to think that this is like 3 games in. I'd done a pre-season. But it took time. It took a bit longer. And I think you have to just respect the fact that I had chemotherapy and I had cancer. And even though the doctor said to me, even though you don't feel ill, you are very ill. But I don't feel it. And the chemotherapy does its thing. And it's obviously to kill cancer. It's got to be doing something. It's got to have something about it. And it was a tough road to get back to fitness. But that following year, I played more games than any other time in my career. So, I managed to get myself back fit and back playing and staying fit as well.
Yeah, and there would have been a part of you as well wanting to kind of push yourself to get back to even more fitter than you were. And obviously, having seen you play, I'm not surprised that you had that desire and determination to do that as well. So yeah, and I think that's testament to like the mindset of somebody like yourself. Just going,
like I said,
I have to do that.
When I never even thought about death. It wasn't even something that crossed my mind. And when I was playing at Ipswich, I played every game that season, well, pretty much. And when I was left out of the team, obviously, no one knew why. So the local press, the national press, they're saying, where's Cundy gone? He's been playing the last, 25 games, whatever it was. Where's he gone? He's finished. He vanished off the face of the earth. And there was a rumour knocking around, because rumours right, that I've been failed for a drugs test, which kind of fits that. You haven't got answers. You try and make your own ones up. But the journo did interview afterwards, and he said to me, which I never even thought about. He said, "Did you think you were going to die?" And I'm like, "No, that hadn't even crossed my mind." Now, I was young. I was 27, and I was in the peak of my fitness as a footballer. And I think that mindset comes from being a young man, a fit young man. Obviously, a very positive outlook on life. But it's amazing now. If I was put in that position now, I'm not so sure I'd have that same outlook. I think it would be a very different reaction to the man I am now. I'm 54 now. So this happened almost like to another Jason, It's almost happened like someone else, and I happened to be watching it. So, yeah, I was in a very fortunate position being a fit young man, surrounded by, the best doctors and treatment. So, yeah, I was lucky.
Yeah, and I think as well, like obviously the time the social media and things like that didn't exist, and the legacy press, like the newspapers or radio was the only way you could get that kind of story corrected out. Was there any apprehension in you talking about your cancer diagnosis and it being testicular cancer at the time, or were you always quite open to speak about it?
Yeah, never had a problem about it. I kind of felt it was my duty, really, being a kind of a public figure. I did an article in a Sunday tabloid newspaper. They come around, done all the photographs, all that sort of stuff, and done an interview. No, I've never had a problem talking about it. It's not something I'm ashamed of. I'm actually quite proud to say that I've had cancer. And it's something that, 1 in 2 now, I believe, is the statistic. I've got friends of mine who's gone through it. My dad has prostate cancer now. He's 95, so at his age, you'd expect him to have that at some stage. He's taking tablets and he's dealing with it fine. He's not in any pain or suffering. Both my wife's parents died of cancer, so it's part of our life. Everyone watching this will know someone very close to them that's either got it or had it.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously being in football, it's always portrayed as, especially in the kind of mid to late 90s, it was quite a tough masculine sport is the way that it was portrayed. How were your teammates and the club and all that around you? Like, were they supportive? Did they ask you questions and things like that when they knew?
Do you know what? I cannot speak highly enough of Ipswich. George Burley and David Sheepshanks and the doctor and the physio and all the medical staff, they were absolutely superb. The way they looked after me, the way they supported me, my family. They realised that it was when I sat down with the physio, the club doctor, the chairman, and George Burley, I had to go in that room and tell them that I had cancer. And I just remember sitting there, and they were more uncomfortable about it than I was, because they're sitting there thinking, shit, this guy could die. That's probably what was going through, or something similar. So I never had a problem talking about it, but they were brilliant. They asked me. I wanted to try and come back fit that season, and George Burley wanted me to come back, but it was futile. But they then said, look, take your time. You do. This is not now more important. You're the most important thing. We'll plan for next season. And I can't speak highly enough of them.
Yeah, and over the years, we've seen quite a lot of football players diagnosed, like yourself, Alan Stubbs, John Hartson.
Yep.
Obviously, Dylan Tombides passed away because of it. 21, Dylan was. And then there's Henry Lansbury just last year came out talking about how he had it. And given the number of players that are affected and the age range it impacts, I don't know if you feel like this as well, but there doesn't seem to be a great focus on testicular cancer and testicular health in the game as such compared to other campaigns. Do you think there is a way to kind of get more visibility of testicular cancer in the game?
I think you can always have more. You can always have and want more. I think the beauty, if there is such a thing, or a beauty of testicular cancer, is that it's a young man's disease. There's mid-teens you can get it. It's rare. But basically going from your late teens up until like your mid to late 30s, I believe, is the real catchment area. And when you're talking about that age demographic, you are talking football, whether you're supporting or playing. So there is a real catchment that I think that football, not just football, rugby, anywhere where young men congregate. I remember I'd done something with the fire brigade. And you think about the young men coming into the fire. It's a very not necessarily so much so now, but a very male dominated area. The forces is another one where I think that lots more can be done across lots of different jobs, lots of different backgrounds. Even I think there's so much more that can be done. But I have to say, from when I first had it to now, there is so much more information. There are so many more people prepared to talk about it, discuss it, and react upon it. Because, if young men are still dying from testicular cancer, it is a real travesty, because it's very treatable, as I'm here, very treatable if caught early enough. And that's the key, as in all cancers. Getting caught, finding it early is one thing. You've got to react upon it. There's no point in you having a swollen testicle for 6 months if you haven't done nothing about it. So,
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, and I think that's something as Cahonas we try to get over as much as we can. It's that the early detection is key, but it's what you do with that early detection. And I was lucky enough that I worked in the NHS for nearly 18 years before I got the role with Cahonas, and the fact that we were able to kind of utilise, like, speaking to friends and family and staff who worked it and go, no, go and get that checked. You're checked quickly with your GP, but there's still a lot of men, I think, even now, still scared of getting their balls touched by their GP. And it's like, the GPs have seen all shapes and sizes. They don't care. They just want to get you healthy.
Yeah.
And I think a big part of that awareness thing, you look at the time where I was growing up, Lance Armstrong was like the kind of the almost the poster boy of testicular cancer at that point. But I think after his controversies, it seems like awareness of testicular cancer kind of waned a little bit as well. I don't know if you feel that there still is maybe a stigma in and around testicular cancer, even within like in football as well?
I would like,
Because like you say, you're so
yeah,
open walking about naked, but
yeah.
there's the health issue as
I
well.
would like to think not, but I'm not that naive. Like I said at the very beginning, I was lucky enough to be surrounded by physios and doctors on a daily basis. Most young men do not have that luxury. There is an effort to go and book a GP, especially after what's happened with COVID. Trying to get a GP appointment nowadays, they're at hen's teeth. You phone up, they try to get your booking 2 weeks later, or or phone back tomorrow, or email in. It's very difficult, and that is a stumbling block that really, not just for cancer but for all illnesses, is becoming I can't be bothered. I'll be all right, because it's so much effort now. But I can't stress enough that effort is absolutely worth it. Because what's the worst that can happen, right? The worst that can happen is you find out you're ill. Well, you would rather know, wouldn't you, than not. The real worst that can happen beyond that is having it and not knowing. That, I can't think of a worst case scenario. So, and I get it, because young men, it's not an easy thing to get, to get your tackle out and show someone. It's been my life, but I understand and accept. My two young boys, one's 30, one's 24. They regularly check themselves, obviously, because it's chance of them having it are that much higher. But get your partner to check them. Have some fun with it, maybe. I don't know, but know what your balls feel like, because that's another thing that you need. You need to familiarise with what your natural body is. Not everyone's testicle is going to be the same. So find out. You might have a little cyst on it. What is that? So know what your body looks like and feels like, and if there are any changes, act upon it.
Yeah, and like you said at the top of the show, as men, like, we sit with our hands down our trousers whether we know it or not. Like, that often, it's like, just take that couple of minutes to do that check. And I always say this when I do talks, because you get people looking at me funny, but it could potentially save your life. Because like you say, early detection is there, but it's what you do with it as well.
Indeed.
I think as well, what we kind of look at as well as after that surgery, and hope you don't mind me asking, did you opt for a prosthetic testicle, or were you just quite happy?
Yeah, they did offer me another one, but I understand why. I was, you can only imagine if you're an 18-year-old single boy and this happened to you, that your body would feel very different. I was a married man. I couldn't care less, really. I got one ball. It didn't bother me, but I can understand why it would bother some people. But I decided I didn't want to have another operation, quite frankly. So, no.
Yeah, I was the same. I was, me and my wife had been together for like 8 years at that time, and we had, like, my son was there, and it was just a case of, I don't want it. It doesn't bother me, You're probably the same. Your masculinity isn't tied to your balls, So it's,
what did happen?
You're just happy enough getting on.
What did happen to me was some years later, and I'd retired now. This would have been early 2000s. My oncologist, I was now playing for Portsmouth, and my oncologist down in Southampton suggested that I have a biopsy in the other ball, because my own personal situation suggested that I might get it in the other side. So I went for a biopsy, and they took just to take a little bit of the testicle away, and it came back, and there are only, I think, about 100 men a year, maybe less, that get this, where I was going to get it in the other side. It was a question of when, not if, when. I'm going to get it. He said, you might get it next week, might get it next month, you might get it next year, but you're definitely going to get testicular again in the other side. And I'd have been 31, 32. And I'm like, this is an absolute, literally ball ache. So, but at this stage, I'd already had another son. I'd had some frozen sperm. And I then decided to go through radiotherapy. And I had, I think, an 8-week course of radiotherapy, once or twice a week, which killed the ball completely. So I it was another kind of part of that journey. It's rare that you can get testicular cancer in both of them, and unfortunately for me, I happen to be that guy that did. But so naturally, I can't father children now, because I've got one ball that's left, another ball that's completely redundant. but I had a 9-year-old, got a 9-year-old son with my new wife because of the frozen sperm that I froze back in 1997. He was born in 18 years later. He popped out. So
Wow.
it's pretty
Yeah.
incredible that even 18 years frozen, we've got
Yeah.
little Leonardo.
That's amazing, and that's the kind of positive, stories that we need to tell as well. People obviously hear the word cancer and things like that, and I think, see, when me and my wife were going through like treatment for me, same kind of thing. Like my sperm count just wasn't climbing at all, and we were trying to have a family before my diagnosis, and we nearly got to the point of needing to do the IVF, but thankfully we were able to kind of do it naturally. But I think if we had heard like your story, like in a podcast like this at that time I was going through it, I think it maybe would have made us feel better about that. And so when you and your wife were going through that the IVF route, how was that on you mentally? Because I know that a lot of guys feel a bit kind of left out because their wife's having so much done. What was that like for you?
Well, so my wife, she didn't have children, and I had two elder boys. I divorced with my wife, my first wife, and it was she was desperate to be a mum, desperate, and I was just like, look, let's go for it. I've got enough sperm. Fortunate for us, she fell pregnant the second time around. But yeah, she went through it. There's a lot that they do. There's a lot of injections, but it was a journey that we were prepared to go on. Like I said, she was desperate to be a mum, desperate, and to meet someone that naturally couldn't father children. She's like, wow, all of these years have been, and now I meet you. But fortunately, the frozen sperm, it's remarkable if you think about it. To be frozen for 18 years. I meet a new wife. So I need a woman to marry her, and now we've got a little 9-year-old Leonardo. It's one of the good stories actually. Yeah, she went through it. It's difficult. It's time consuming. There's a lot of stuff that's going on up here and here for both of us, but in particular, my wife Hannah. But we got through it, And like I said, it was all that she went through, and it's worth it now. So
yeah, because I think that's the one thing that out with all the testicular cancer talk that we can have. We can talk about the chemo and the surgery, but it's stuff like fertility doesn't get spoken about quite enough. Because you don't realise that maybe you might end up sterile because of the chemo, and at 27, your first time round, and already having your son. And then fast forward to that point, mentally, was that a drain on you? Like, feeling that did you have the thoughts, what if IVF doesn't work? How did that mentally affect you?
Oh yeah, look, we were very much aware that there was only a finite amount of sperm. I couldn't go back again to the well. The well's empty. The well's dry. But we had enough for plenty of goes. This was going to be a long journey, no matter what. It was lucky for us that the second time that she had IVF, she fell pregnant. So we were very, very fortunate. I've had friends of mine that took years. I mean, and he was very fit and healthy when they put them. He didn't have what I went through. So I know how difficult it can be, and they're little miracles, babies. Anyway, whether they're IVF, whether they're naturally conceived, they are little miracles, and we're eternally grateful that we could have a family together.
Yeah, and again, it's such an amazing end to that cancer journey for you to still be able to do that, and like you say, modern science and being able to kind of go, no, that's been in a freezer for 18 years, but then bang, you've still managed.
Honestly,
it's incredible.
In a freezer somewhere in Cambridge, it was, and for years I'd forgotten about it, and then I meet my new wife who didn't have children. All of a sudden, it's like I might have a solution.
Yeah, and I suppose as well, you maybe did you forget about that as such when that discussion happened? Were you like, oh, actually, this could work for this?
Yeah, I mean, because I'd had 2 healthy boys with my first wife, and at that particular time, the frozen sperm was done because I'd only had 1 child. And then I naturally conceived James, or we naturally conceived with James. It was just off my radar for years. And it wasn't until I split with my wife and met my now wife, did it then come back into my. I do have some frozen sperm. I think it's in Cambridge, So we had to track it down. That was another one. Where is it? they couldn't dispose of it without my signature. And it, for years it just sat in there. Didn't even think about it until I met my new wife.
Yeah. Well, brilliant. And then obviously, having all that happen to you during your playing career and having cancer as a young fit man, I think the thing that we try to kind of look at is as most people do now, the mental health aspect to that. Did you have any challenges, after your treatment and surgeries that you felt that, did you feel, even though you were happy to not get that replacement testicle, but did you feel, you hear a lot of guys saying, I felt like less of a man and all that type of thing. Did you struggle mentally with coming to terms with your cancer?
I can't say I did. No, I found I've got some very interesting mates with their sense of humour. And I did find making a laugh and a joke of it was perhaps my way of dealing with it. And I still do. I'm born and bred in Wimbledon. Of course, we know about the Wombles. Well, I was the Womble from Wimbledon. So, there's that kind of take on it. Often I'll make jokes about it on TalkSport when I do a show. It's not something that's ever bothered me. It's not something that's I ever feel embarrassed or ashamed about. I never even, it literally, nothing, it didn't change me one little bit, fortunately. So I've been very fortunate. I think, like I said, at that stage of my life, I was very comfortable in my own skin and very much felt 6'4" and bulletproof because of your fitness levels and you're a professional footballer. There was a level of confidence about me. Now, if I got prostate cancer at 54, I think you'd see a very different reaction. I don't know, but I think you'd see a very different Jason Cundy taking on cancer that he did at 54 than he did at 27.
Yeah, and that's probably as well, you're 27 and you're almost blinkered and you're just on a drive. Yeah, whereas, yeah, you really do. But then, the older you get really kind of sentimental, and then you've got your boys. Leonardo obviously being still really young.
Yeah.
It would be a very different prospect for you now
the older
as well.
You get, you're far more aware of your immortality now. I'm looking at my dad who's 95. He's been in hospital for nearly 2 months. He broke his hip, and then he got COVID, and then he got pneumonia, and he only came out last week. So I'm watching my dad in his final years, hopefully, but he's still very much, he's back home now. He's got all his faculties, but the older you get, you don't think about death when you're 27, 37, really. It's not until you have children and then you start to look at your dad and you start to realise that at 54, I'm well over halfway through my life. And you start to feel, and, I don't want to get too morbid here, but you do have a very different look at yourself. And I look back at that maybe slightly arrogant 27-year-old that was confident, a bit brash maybe. But now, that's couldn't be further from the truth now. So I think that probably happens to all of us at some stage.
Yeah, I think it is. And I think you as well, obviously having been through that and having an insight into cancer because of your testicular cancer twice, obviously does that as well. And just to kind of go back to that second round that you had with the radiotherapy, because you're the kind of first guest that I've had on that has had the radiotherapy. How different was that for you than the chemo? Because obviously it's not going to be the bags and things like that, but how did that feel and make you feel having the radio?
Well, it was over a longer period. The chemotherapy I was in and out in a couple of days. It was one big blast, quite a powerful dose from what I can remember. The radiotherapy was spread over maybe 8 weeks, 2 months, and it was driving to Southampton. I lived in Hampshire at the time, and it was an hour's drive to Southampton, sitting, waiting, and the funny thing when I was sat there for the radiotherapy, I was by some distance the youngest person there every time. By some distance, yeah. I was very much aware that, the people that waited for the radiotherapy, they were in their 60s, 70s, that kind of. So I was very much aware that I was still very young to be having this kind of treatment. So I'd have been, just 31, 32 I was. So it just goes to show that it will hit then 31, 32. It doesn't matter, if the fact that I had it before. But the radiotherapy was draining in a different way. It wasn't quite as. It's not like the chemo was like a smack in it was, and you felt like that. The radiotherapy was spread out over a longer period. Still felt fatigued, but not quite as flat on your back as you felt you could be. So I still functioned. I was coaching at the time at Chelsea's academy. So I was still coaching. But I did notice that my fatigue levels were damaged. Yeah.
Yeah, and by no surprise as well, that because of that,
my taste changed. I was tasting metal or something like that. I seem to remember tasting a very peculiar sensation, taste in my mouth. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember when I was going through my chemo that I had because I had one that had platinum in it. That's all I could taste. I just had that metal mouth,
okay.
And it was awful. Oh, it was awful. And the only thing I could eat was Ritz crackers and lemon juice, and they didn't. You wouldn't do that normally, but that's all I could do.
Okay. You can't stand them now, Ritz.
Cannot eat them. I see you smell them. You're like, oh, and even like when I. Went home. My wife had obviously got the kind of bedroom all ready so I could relax. Lit a lavender candle. See lavender still to this day. I'm like, ooh.
Yeah. Well, at least you're around to smell it, right?
Well, exactly. And I suppose that's the other thing as well. Have you had any, because I've had a little bit of peripheral neuropathy. So I had that lost feeling in my fingertips going through chemo, and I got a bit of tinnitus. Did you have any weird wee side effects that you could maybe look back and go, oh, that was maybe because of my chemotherapy?
Don't think so. No, I think the fingertip thing I have when I wake up in the mornings, but I think that's just old age. So I can't put that down. Chemotherapy. No, I don't recall anything that I can recall. That one particular thing, it was just the energy levels. Well, that was absolutely whacked. That was it, really. So I think in terms of side effects, no, I don't remember any of that now.
That's good because there's I think you find that it's like anything, like medicine's going to affect people different ways for different reasons. You get some people who sail through their chemo and things like that, and you get others who get everything under the sun type of thing. So I suppose looking back on your treatment, and what piece of advice would you give to, even if it was like your younger self when you first faced your diagnosis, and for anybody watching or listening right now who might be going through treatment, what kind of wisdom can you share with them?
So look, first and foremost, the most important thing is to check yourself. You might have young cousins, uncle, brother. Encourage young men and young women, to check their bodies, to feel what is naturally your body, what it looks like, what it feels like. And if you do find anything untoward, do not wait. Don't wait. Act upon it straight away. I can't stress enough. If there was one piece of words I could give to anyone, whether you're talking about testicular cancer or anything, that is advice you've got to give to them. If you find something that you're not sure about, go to your GP. That's their job. That's what they're paid for. In terms of going through treatment, I think that you're listening to my story, and I can't stress enough how lucky I was that I was in a position where I had people around me every day looking out for my physical well-being, and I could react like that. I've gone from Thursday night finding the testicle change to Saturday to a doctor seeing it, and on Monday having a scan, on the Tuesday I had the operation. So Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Mondays, so we're talking less than a week. I had that. So, but that can happen for young men as well if you find it quick enough. So when I went through the chemotherapy, it's going to make you better. It's there. If you get to that stage and you're having chemotherapy, you've already half dealt with it in my mind. You've already made. There are some young men that never get to having chemo, or the chemotherapy they have is futile. So if you're finding yourself in a situation where you're getting treated, you're in the best hands, and it's there to help you. So, it's lots of people have been through it. You're not the first, you won't be the last, and you need support. You need your family around you. I was very lucky. My parents were both around, my brother and sister. My wife, I had the club, I had a support network around me, and it's if you are watching someone go through treatment, they will, they'll need your support, whether it's testicular cancer or any kind of cancer, they need your support. So, yeah, look, we're both living proof that you can come out the other side and lead very happy, healthy lives afterwards.
Yeah, and happy, healthy lives, and still, and your proof of is still having children as well. So it's not, I think, and that's the important thing, is that guys who might not realise, when they hear about that, fertility issue, there's Jason Cundy having had it, there's, Todd that we've had on the show able to do that, so it's still there for them, and I think, I think that's the important thing. And to kind of follow on for what you're saying as well, it's the stigma and embarrassment around it. I suppose I grew up, playing rugby and was like the same yourself. You just walk about in the nude. It wouldn't care, but you might get guys who aren't in that environment. But don't worry about going to your doctors with this thing, because it doesn't matter. They've seen it all.
Don't die of ignorance. Yeah. That's that's what it will, if you're too proud and you find something and you're worried about seeing your GP, this is what they do for a living. This is their job. Seeing another man's testicles and penis, they don't care. It's their everyday life almost. So don't die of embarrassment. Don't die of ignorance.
Well, there's a soundbite right there, Jason. It's perfect. Thank you so much for giving me your time today. Honestly, it's really impactful when we have. Yeah, it's really impactful for us to be like guys like yourself who've got like a big presence in the world as well to kind of help us get rid of that stigma and embarrassment.
Right,
so we're so grateful.
It's been fascinating. I love talking about it because it is a duty, I think, of mine, ours, yours. And you're doing great work with this. I've had a look at some of the podcasts you've done, and it's just getting the message out there. And you can't talk about it enough, I don't think. So it's been, I enjoy talking about it. It's been going back over old ground, but it's something I am proud of. So thank you very much for inviting me.
November is Men's Health Awareness Month, and Heck have partnered with Cahonas Scotland to help raise awareness about testicular cancer. Don't be checking, check.